since I started editing this journal, what I've been surprised at, or pleasantly surprised at, is the range of papers that we're getting, the types and issues that are being raised. A lot of what we've been looking at, what I've been receiving, is about the built environment, but there's also lots of buried and maritime and all sorts of angles, and it seems to me that that is exactly what I hoped we would get. This is a very broad-based journal. We want to look at the whole of the historic environment and not try and compartmentalise things. Similarly, I would also point out that very strongly on the title it says policy and practice. So this is very much a practical journal. It's about how we manage the historic environment, good ideas for how to manage it, best practice, publicising those and disseminating it as broadly as possible. In terms of the types of papers, I think the one that's just been published, 4.1 here in beginning of 2013, is a good example. We've got one on urban heritage, which talks about the management of historic fabric within cities. We've got another one about the management of archaeological databases and archives, and in fact we've got one for an important article on looking at how archaeology has been worked through in the political environment in the UK and how it's perceived by government. We've got something on cultural mapping in Asia. We've got something on defining heritage, in this case in terms of the modern environment. We've got the last article here is on how an initiative in southeastern Europe, in former Soviet bloc countries, is working with the Council of Europe to retain their historic fabric. So that's an enormously broad range, and I've just been, the noise you can hear in the background is the IFA conference, which is going on at this very moment, and I'm here to gather more papers. So I've just heard something on the management of archaeological archives, of how one can get professionals, museum curators, contractors talking to each other, and I've asked someone to put their talk into a paper, which I hope will feed into him. So, given that background, it's not surprising to me that we're having to move to 3 issues, because it was always the intention, in fact, ultimately it's the intention to move to 4 issues, but at the moment 3 issues, because we are actually getting so much material, so much good material, that I want to publish it, and we need to publish it more. And the trigger for it, in fact, was themed issues. We had 2 people approach us, 2 groups I should say, approach us to offer particular themed issues. One was on sustainable energy efficiency in the built environment and sustainability issues, which the call for papers for that has gone out, and hopefully we'll be publishing that. The idea is to publish that next year. That's with Maeve Cassar's unit in London, the Centre for Sustainable Environment. And then there's another one the year after that, which has already been offered to us, and I hope that we can pull that together too. I'm sure it will happen. And that's about, it's entitled 21st Century Archaeologists, and that's looking at teaching, training and the professional development of archaeology in these very trying circumstances at the moment. So, and in the future, one of my hopes was always that we could take the IFA conference, take the best papers from the IFA conference and turn that into some sort of themed issue, into some sort of reflection of the really high quality that we get at this conference, of papers, of ideas, of communication and networking, and I hope that that will be able to become an element of the journal in the future. So for the next few issues this year, we're going to be, already got some papers in. We've got an article on an interesting monument, a Byzantine tower up in northern Greece, which became the focus for an Australian couple who took it on and lived there for many years, decades, and actively engaged with the community, displaced Greek community who had been displaced from Asia Minor in the upheavals of the early 20th century, they brought with them their memories of the region that they'd been raised up in, and in particular the tradition of weaving and carpet working, and the museum is built around that, and so it talks about this monument in relation to the intangible heritage. So there's a tangible heritage of the past, but there's the intangible heritage of a culture that's been displaced to the homeland, if you like, but clearly they still felt themselves to be Anatolian in that sense. So that's a nice example. Other ones we've got looking at professional practice and the gap between professional standards, if you like, and the guidance, the sort of real-time impacts of what's happening in the real world. So, for example, and that's taking the example of the very large, often very large architecturally complexes that the mentally ill were put in the 19th century. These are now becoming redundant because of changes in policy of how we manage people. These people are often sent back into the community, supported there. And this is looking at what do we do with these buildings? And there's a contrast, there's a perceived contrast between the official guidance, if you like, in this case for English heritage, and the current reform of the planning legislation, which is apparently in conflict. So that's a nice article on that. We've got a terrific site, which is going to be written about by Shane Kelleher of Ironbridge Museums, and that's looking at the Middleport pottery, a functioning Victorian pottery in Stoke-on-Trent, which is a terrific piece of almost theatrical industry, wonderful skills, demonstration of skills and practices in the Victorian, in the original Victorian setting, and looking at that as a model, as a catalyst for regeneration of that area. And then lastly, another article that's been offered, which is on southern Sudan, looking at an ancient port there and looking at tangible and intangible heritages in conflict in that locale, and looking at how development pressures and conservation pressures, which we see all over the world, impact on that particular community. So my driving aim is always to continue the focus on developing interesting, engaging, and I hope stimulating papers, not designed just for a UK audience. It's an international journal. It's got something for everyone, I would hope, professionals of all aspects and types. So I do hope that you continue to find it good reading, and I look forward to hearing from you, hearing articles from you in the future. So please send them to me, always happy to receive.